I'm Andrea Collins, a 29-year-old marketing consultant living in Seattle. Last Christmas, I booked a red-eye flight home, expecting warm lights, laughter, and my family's usual chaos. But when I arrived, the house was dark, eerily silent, with just my grandfather sitting alone, clutching a sandwich and a note. What I discovered in the next few minutes changed how I saw my family forever. If you've ever come home expecting love and found heartbreak instead, stay with me. And hey, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that hit you right where it hurts. I had always associated Christmas with the scent of cinnamon rolls, the screech of cousins playing tag, and the constant background noise of my mother's radio humming old carols. That year, I flew from Austin to small-town Vermont to be with my family, my first holiday back since taking on a big campaign job. My suitcase was filled with gifts, and my heart was packed with expectations. I imagined hugs at the door, my dad's usual teasing, and Mom handing me her cocoa mug before I'd even taken off my coat. But instead, I was greeted by darkness. The cab driver even asked if I had the wrong address. I triple-checked the house number 18 Birchwood Lane, our family home, for nearly 3 decades. Not a single light was on, no snowman in the yard, no wreath on the door. I hesitated before stepping out of the car, my chest tightening as a sense of unease settled in. Maybe the power had gone out. Or maybe they were surprising me with something. That was wishful thinking. Still, I pushed down the worry and rang the doorbell. It echoed too loudly in the silent night. No footsteps. No voices. I pulled out my spare key, one I hadn't used in years, and unlocked the door. Inside, the house was cold. Not freezing, but clearly untouched for hours. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. I called out, "Hello," my voice felt too loud. That's when I saw him. My grandfather, Paul, sitting at the kitchen table in a sweater too thin for winter, with a sandwich on a plate and a folded note beside him. He looked up, startled. His expression twisted between relief and shame. "They didn't tell you, huh?" he said quietly. His voice cracked as he gestured toward the note. My legs moved without permission. I reached for it, hands trembling. As I unfolded the paper, I could barely process the messy handwriting. "We went to Aspen. Sorry, couldn't wait. We'll call later. Mom and Dad." That was it. No explanation, no warning, just gone. If you've ever felt blindsided by the people who were supposed to think of you first, you know how disorienting it is. Please take a moment to subscribe, because these stories, they need to be heard. You're not alone. And neither was I. That moment became the beginning of something I never saw coming, something that would unravel everything. I thought I understood about love, loyalty, and family priorities. Growing up in Vermont meant white Christmases, scratchy scarves, and traditions that felt timeless. Every December 23rd, we'd bake a ridiculous amount of cookies, my dad always sneaking the peanut butter ones. On Christmas Eve, Grandpa would read from the same old storybook, with pages yellowed by time. These weren't just rituals. They were the rhythm of our lives, the glue that kept us together. And now, it was like someone had torn the whole rhythm sheet and thrown it out with the garbage. I sat with Grandpa in that silent house, watching him nibble his sandwich like it was a chore. "When did they leave?" I asked. He sighed. "2 days ago, they told me you'd understand. Understand. That they left an elderly man alone without proper heating. That they didn't even bother to text me." He shook his head as if trying to defend them. "They said you'd probably be too busy to come anyway. Said you hadn't confirmed your ticket." I had. Weeks ago. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages. My mom had even sent a thumbs-up emoji when I told her my flight time. No one had said anything about Aspen. No one had said they wouldn't be there. And it wasn't just about MIT, it was about Grandpa, about the house, about everything we claimed to hold dear. I could feel something in me beginning to shift, like a veil lifting, showing me how replaceable some people truly make you feel. That night, I set up the fireplace, heated some leftover soup, and tried to smile. But the truth was, I felt abandoned. It wasn't just their physical absence, it was what it symbolized. They had chosen glamour, snow-capped mountains, and ski lodges over time with their own family. The holidays weren't about family anymore. They were about status, Instagrammable moments, shiny, perfect lies that hid the rot underneath. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay awake wondering how long this had been brewing. Had I missed the signs? Or was I always just too eager to believe in the best? I had worked so hard to stay connected. Phone calls, care packages, holiday cards. But now, I was beginning to suspect I'd been the only one investing. And the returns? Well, they were looking more and more like emotional bankruptcy. The next morning, Grandpa was already up, sipping weak coffee and reading the same newspaper twice. I sat beside him in the dim light of the kitchen, noticing how aged he looked. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the sugar, and the rings under his eyes were darker than I remembered. I couldn't help but ask again, "Why didn't they bring you?" His answer was simple, but devastating. Bringing me would have complicated their plans. They saw him as a burden now. And maybe, if I was honest with myself, they saw me the same way. An interruption. A reminder of a version of our family that no longer fit their lifestyle. Aspen was for the new them. The ones with money. The ones who hosted fundraisers and sent yearly newsletters printed on glossy paper. The ones who didn't want to slow down for Grandpa's limp or my messy feelings. I felt like we were the old furniture beloved, but eventually tossed out. I spent the day cleaning up the house, replacing light bulbs, cooking an actual breakfast. Grandpa watched from the couch, occasionally dozing off with a blanket wrapped around him. He'd always been the quiet one, the one who let everyone else speak first. But now, I realized how much had gone unsaid over the years, how much he had observed without interfering. I asked if he felt hurt. He simply nodded, his eyes glassy. Later, I wandered into the living room and looked at the family photos. Me and my brother building snowmen, Grandpa teaching me to whittle, my mom laughing in a way I hadn't seen in years. It all looked like a storybook. But those frames didn't show the slow erosion that came later. They didn't show the new traditions made without us, the missed calls, the holidays spent alone while excuses piled up. Looking at those photos made me feel like I was mourning someone who was still alive. That evening, Grandpa handed me a second note, one he'd written himself. "If they don't come back for us, we'll make our own Christmas." My throat closed up. I nodded and lit the candles on the windowsill myself. We didn't need the others to keep tradition alive. We just needed each other. For the first time that season, I felt something close to peace. And it started with the smallest things. The next day, I decided to check the mail. It was stacked and disorganized, like no one had touched it since Thanksgiving. Amid the pile of ads and cards, I found a glossy envelope with a photo of my parents on the covers, smiling, toasting champagne on a snowy mountaintop. Aspen Holiday 2024. It read in gold script. I opened it slowly, half dreading what I might find inside. There it was. A full itinerary for a 2-week luxury trip with their friends. My name wasn't mentioned once. It wasn't just a spontaneous getaway, they had planned this. Reserved the lodge. Hired a private chef. Scheduled sleigh rides and couples massages. And in all that planning, they had intentionally chosen not to include me. Not even as a thought. I stood in the entryway clutching that envelope, feeling like a guest in a home I used to belong to. The kind of pain that doesn't scream but hums low, sharp, and constant. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was exclusion. That envelope was a mirror, showing me what I hadn't wanted to admit. I was no longer part of the story they were writing. They had traded family for fantasy. I wanted to believe it was just a misstep, that they were caught up in excitement. But deep down, I knew better. This was a decision. A line drawn in silence, and I was standing on the wrong side of it, holding the proof in my hands. I threw the envelope in the trash, but the betrayal stayed with me. Grandpa saw it in my eyes when I returned to the kitchen. "Don't let them harden you," he said, placing his hand on mine. "You love too deep to go cold." I nodded, but his words hit a part of me I was trying hard to protect. I wasn't angry because they left. I was angry because they didn't think I'd care. Like I had no reason to expect love anymore. And maybe that's the worst part, when people treat your hurt like an overreaction, like your loyalty was foolish. But I wasn't about to drown in their silence. I would take this pain and do something with it. Something they couldn't ignore. With the betrayal still fresh, I focused on Grandpa. If they didn't want to show up for Christmas, we'd make our own version of it. I found a few old strings of lights tangled in the garage, some of them still working. We hung them across the front porch and lit up the house like we were expecting 100 guests. Just the two of us, and yet, the warmth felt real. We cooked what we had: mashed potatoes from a box, canned green beans, a frozen apple pie I found tucked behind a bag of peas. I wrapped Grandpa's slippers in newspaper and gave them back to him with a bow. He laughed, then pulled out a tiny tin from the bookshelf. Inside was a pair of old earrings I'd admired when I was 13. "Your grandma wore these every year," he said softly. "Now they're yours." I cried harder than I expected. That night, we lit the fireplace and played records from the 60s. Grandpa danced with his cane, and I joined him barefoot on the creaky floor. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't Instagram-worthy, but it was real, the kind of joy that doesn't need a filter. I didn't post a thing, didn't tell anyone. For the first time, it felt like Christmas wasn't something to perform, it was something to protect. We didn't talk much about my parents, not because we were avoiding it, but because we didn't need to. The absence spoke loud enough. Instead, we talked about memories. About how Grandpa met Grandma at a winter dance. About how he built this house with his own hands after the war. I realized I'd spent so much of my adult life running forward that I'd forgotten how rich my roots were, and how much love could live in a single room. Before bed, I thanked him. Not just for the earrings or the stories, but for staying. For being the one who didn't leave. "You saved Christmas," I whispered. He chuckled. "Nah, you just remembered what it was all about." The day after Christmas, I wrote a letter. Not to accuse or confront, but to tell the truth. I told my parents how their silence felt like erasure. How they had left a man alone who raised them both. How they had stripped Christmas of its meaning and handed it to luxury. I didn't send it to guilt them. I sent it because my heart needed to speak, even if no one answered. I left the envelope on the counter, beside the remnants of the apple pie. No threats, no dramatic declarations. Just my voice. Finally, steady. Then I packed up my things, but I didn't go back to Seattle just yet. I extended my stay by 2 weeks. Took work calls from Grandpa's kitchen, bought groceries, repaired a loose stair. We built routines, just the two of us, and it felt like I was building more than time. I was building dignity. My parents never responded to the letter, not a word, but I stopped waiting. That was the part that surprised me. I thought I'd feel empty, but instead I felt free. Like I'd let go of a rope I didn't realize I'd been gripping with both hands. Sometimes, the absence of love teaches you more than its presence ever could, especially when the silence leaves room for something better to grow. Grandpa and I started walking every morning, just a few blocks, slow and quiet. People in the neighborhood waved. Some invited us to dinners. Having noticed the house dark on Christmas Eve, we figured something was off, one woman said. "Glad you stayed." Their kindness filled the space my parents left behind, one casserole at a time. It was during one of those walks that Grandpa stopped, looked at me, and said, "You know, maybe this was supposed to happen, so we could remember each other." I smiled. Not just because he was right, but because, for the first time, I believed it too. About a week after Christmas, while making tea, I heard Grandpa's landline ring, one of those dusty old cordless phones people forgot even existed. He asked me to grab it. When I answered, I didn't expect to hear my mother's voice, bright, carefree, and completely unaware I was on the other end. "Can you check if Dad remembered to unplug the tree lights before they left? Aspen's charging for extra electricity back home," she laughed. I didn't speak right away. She kept going, complaining about resort prices and how Dad forgot her gloves. When I finally said, "Hi, Mom," there was a silence so sharp I could hear her breathing change. "Oh, Andrea," I thought. Her voice trailed off. I didn't give her a chance to fill the gap. I handed the phone to Grandpa, walked outside, and let the cold slap me back to clarity. That call wasn't meant for me, but it told me everything. After the conversation, Grandpa came to find me on the porch. She asked if you were okay, he said gently. I told her you were better than they gave you credit for. His loyalty pierced straight through the numbness. I thanked him with a hug that lasted longer than usual. I didn't cry, not then. But something in me unraveled, like a knot coming loose slowly, painfully. That call reminded me how easy it was for them to forget who I really was. It was one thing to leave us behind. It was another to act like we didn't exist. My mom had always been the type to see things through rose-colored glasses, except when those things didn't match the version of reality she wanted to believe. I realized that this wasn't just about a forgotten holiday. It was about decades of brushing off truths, sweeping discomfort under rugs, and pretending absence was love. That moment made one thing clear. I wasn't going to wait for an apology that would never come. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at a table that was already packed with people who didn't look for me. I had found something better. Not louder, not shinier, but real. And I wasn't about to trade that for performance. With my parents gone and silence still echoing in the background, Grandpa and I created new rhythms. We repainted the kitchen cabinets, a pale yellow something Grandma always wanted to do. We baked cornbread from scratch, though we burned it twice before getting it right. We read books out loud on snowy evenings, taking turns and laughing at the voices we gave the characters. It was simple, but it healed more than I expected. Every small act stitched a little hole in my heart. It was the way Grandpa handed me his scarf before I even asked. The way he noticed when I needed space or when I needed company. I had spent so long chasing approval from people who never saw me clearly that I forgot what it felt like to be gently understood. Living with Grandpa reminded me, sometimes love whispers, it doesn't need to shout. One morning, I woke up to the smell of cinnamon and cloves. Grandpa had tried to make French toast the way my mom used to when I was little. It was soggy and slightly burnt, but I ate every bite. Not because it was perfect, but because it was offered with heart. In that moment, I understood something. Real love doesn't always come wrapped in grand gestures. Sometimes it's in burnt toast and old records. We didn't talk about the Aspen trip again. It wasn't worth it. What mattered was what we were building now. A home that felt like refuge, not like a performance stage. I stopped checking my phone for their updates. I stopped comparing my Christmas to anyone else's. For once, I let go of the need to prove I was doing fine and just started living in the proof. And slowly, something shifted in me. I felt grounded, less anxious, less performative. Like I had returned to myself, one cup of tea and one conversation at a time. It wasn't flashy, but it was real, and I'd take real over perfect any day. 2 weeks later, I was pouring birdseed into the feeder out front when a black SUV pulled into the driveway. I knew that car. My dad stepped out first, sunglasses still on, followed by my mom, her hair freshly blown out, looking like she'd stepped off a catalog page. Their smiles faded the moment they saw me. They weren't expecting anyone home, especially not me. They approached hesitantly. My mom gave a half hug, stiff and uncertain. "We thought you'd left already," she said, as if that explained anything. I didn't answer. I didn't owe them an explanation. Grandpa stepped outside behind me, leaning on his cane. Watching quietly, the tension between us felt like a frozen lake, thick, silent, and ready to crack. Inside, they walked around like visitors. My mom commented on the yellow cabinets. My dad asked about the mail. Not once did they mention Christmas. Not once did they ask how Grandpa had managed alone. It was like their absence had never happened. As if denial could scrub clean the facts, I stayed calm. That was the surprising part. I wasn't angry, I was just tired. They stayed for less than 30 minutes, said they were heading to pick up groceries. Promised to catch up properly next week, and then they were gone. No apology, no recognition of what they'd done. Just a pair of strangers passing through the house they used to call home. Grandpa looked at me and said, "Well, that was something." We both laughed. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes laughter is the only way to keep from breaking. I realized then that I didn't want their version of love anymore. I didn't want the illusion. I wanted what Grandpa and I had created. Warmth that didn't need permission. And for the first time, I felt like I didn't need them to validate me anymore. I had already found what they couldn't give. After they left, I waited a few hours, half expecting a text or call, something to acknowledge the strange tension. But there was nothing, no message, no apology, not even a good to see you. I realized they hadn't come back to reconnect. They had come to reclaim their narrative, to make sure the house still looked how they left it. But everything had changed and they had no idea how much. That silence confirmed what words never could. They weren't curious about what we went through while they skied and toasted champagne. They didn't ask how Grandpa managed the cold or why I was still there. Their silence was a story in itself. It told me that what hurt me didn't even register on their radar. And honestly, that kind of ignorance is more painful than outright cruelty. I talked to Grandpa about it that night. He didn't sugarcoat anything. "They built a world that doesn't include us," he said. "And we've got a choice. Keep knocking on the door, or build something better on our side of it." His words hit me deep. I wasn't a child begging for attention anymore. I was a woman deciding what kind of legacy I wanted to carry. And I knew it wouldn't be silence. So we added new pieces to our world. I printed photos from that awkward Christmas and made a scrapbook. We planted herbs on the windowsill, even though it was still too cold. We laughed harder. We said thank you more. And in the gaps they left, we planted something stronger. Connection that doesn't vanish with convenience. That silence didn't break me. It built me. It taught me to speak with action, to love without permission, and to live without waiting for others to approve of my joy. Growing up, I had this habit of running. Whenever things got tense, arguments, misunderstandings, disappointment, I'd flee. Pack a bag, get in the car, leave before I had to feel too much. I learned it from my mom, honestly. Her version of conflict resolution was pretending nothing happened and hoping no one asked questions. I thought it kept me strong, but all it really did was keep me detached. This time was different. I didn't run. I stayed. Not out of obligation, but out of choice. I stayed because healing doesn't happen in motion. It happens in stillness, in the quiet mornings when Grandpa would hum while washing dishes, in the way our routines softened the sharp edges life had left behind. I was finally learning how to be present, how to endure the awkwardness, the discomfort, the things left unsaid and still stay. There was something radical about it. Choosing to be present in the same house where my absence had once been assumed, taking up space, making noise, cooking meals, and laughing loudly with Grandpa. I wasn't hiding or minimizing myself anymore. I was here. And if they didn't see the beauty in that, then maybe they never really saw me at all. One evening, I found an old board game in the basement, one we hadn't played since I was 12. Grandpa and I dusted it off and played by candlelight when the power flickered. I realized I hadn't felt that safe in years. Safe to be silly, safe to be quiet, safe to just be. That kind of safety doesn't come from people who abandon you, it comes from those who stay through your mess. And now I knew. Staying wasn't weakness, it was strength. It was reclaiming everything I was once told didn't matter. My presence was powerful, my love was enough, my story deserved to be told, not erased. A few days before returning to Seattle, I sat in Grandpa's den and wrote another letter. This time, I wasn't sure who it was for. Maybe my parents, maybe myself, maybe the version of me who once needed everyone to choose her. I poured out everything, not to hurt, but to release. I wrote about the coldness, about the lights that never came on, about the sandwich on Grandpa's plate and how that one moment shattered everything. I didn't hold back. I wrote about the feeling of being replaced by vacation plans, about sitting next to someone who deserved warmth and was given absence instead. I wrote about burnt toast and mismatched lights and how they turned out to be more healing than anything Aspen could offer. It was the truest thing I had ever written. And when I finished, I folded the letter and tucked it inside my journal. I didn't send it. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't need to anymore. I wasn't waiting for a response. The healing had already happened. That letter wasn't a cry for connection. It was proof that I had survived the detachment, that I had grown beyond needing explanations from people who never once tried to understand me. Grandpa read it later, with my permission. He nodded and said, This is your story now. He was right, and I would carry it like a badge, not a burden. I didn't need to burn bridges. I just needed to build a life where I didn't have to cross them for validation. That letter reminded me that not every truth needs to be spoken aloud to matter. Some are meant to stay close, to fuel your future quietly. And this truth, it had finally set me free. When I returned to Seattle, something had shifted. My apartment was the same, the streets buzzed the same. But inside, I was changed. I wasn't dragging invisible wounds behind me anymore. I walked differently, thought differently, not because the pain had disappeared, but because I had stopped asking others to fix it. I had stitched it up myself. In little ways, I started honoring that growth. I replaced the framed photo of my whole family on the mantle with one of Grandpa and me, laughing over burnt cookies. I lit candles in the morning just because. I started sketching against something I hadn't done in months. Not for a client, not for approval, just for me. It was like rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried under years of trying to belong. At work, my boss noticed the change. You seem ... lighter, she said during our Monday meeting. I smiled and said nothing. How do you explain that healing sometimes looks like sitting in the dark with someone who stayed, instead of chasing light from those who left? But I knew what she meant. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I was rooted in something deeper, self-acceptance. I began sharing small moments from my trip on social media. Not in a look what I did way, but in an honest, reflective voice. The responses surprised me. Strangers and friends alike messaged me, saying they felt the same, that they, too, had been the forgotten ones. That they wished they had done something different, instead of sitting in silence. It turns out my story wasn't rare, it was just rarely spoken. And in that, I found purpose. Maybe my healing wasn't just for me. Maybe it could be a mirror for someone else. Maybe the story I almost didn't tell could become the reason someone else stopped shrinking to fit into a room that never had a chair for them. A week after getting back, I received a group text from my mom, same cheery tone, already planning next year's holiday trip. Who's in for Aspen again? I stared at it, blinking. No apology, no reference to the silence, no acknowledgement of Grandpa. Just another glossy invitation to perform family, like everything was fine. It felt surreal. I didn't respond right away. I watched the read notifications roll in, my siblings chiming in with ski emojis, jokes, group banter. For a moment, I felt that old ache creeping back in, that longing to be a part of something. But then I remembered the house, not Aspen, the other one. The one filled with mismatched blankets and Grandpa's soft laughter and healing that didn't require snow-covered facades. So instead of replying, I called Grandpa. We still have that puzzle to finish, I said. And I was thinking, maybe next year we host something again, something smaller, realer. He didn't hesitate. I'd like that, a lot. Just like that, I made my decision. I wouldn't be going to Aspen. I wouldn't step back into a place where my presence was optional and my heart was too loud for the silence. They could keep their trip, their curated perfection. I wasn't bitter, I was clear. That house was never mine. Not really. It had always belonged to an idea of family that didn't include people like me, people who didn't fit the mold, who asked too many questions, who stayed behind instead of flying away for optics. I'd rather sit on a creaky couch with someone who sees me than drink champagne with people who pretend not to. Aspen never offered me belonging. But that quiet little house with flickering lights and cold sandwiches, that's where I finally found home. One Sunday morning, Grandpa handed me a weathered photo album. It was filled with black and white images from his youth, his first truck, Grandma dancing in the kitchen, snow-covered fields before the city swallowed them. "This," he said, tapping the worn cover, "is the only inheritance that matters." I understood immediately. It wasn't money or land or titles. It was memory. It was truth. We spent hours flipping through the pages. Each photo carried a story. Not always happy, but always honest. I realized something then. My family had spent years trying to polish a legacy that sparkled on the outside, but cracked under pressure. They built tradition on image, not intimacy. Meanwhile, Grandpa had quietly preserved something real. Something raw. And now, he was giving it to me. He told me I could take the album home. Add to it, he said. Make it yours. I did. I printed new photos, ones of us sipping tea by the window, of the ugly sweater night that no one else saw, of my reflection in the window holding a candle alone. These were sacred. They told the truth of what happened when no one was looking. Legacy, I learned, isn't about what you're handed, it's about what you choose to keep. I chose laughter over luxury, presence over presentation, connection over convention. And in doing so, I was building a new story. One my future children or friends or anyone hurting might one day need to see. This wasn't about cutting ties or burning bridges. It was about honoring the pieces that mattered and letting the rest float away like snow that never stuck. Grandpa's album didn't erase the pain, but it reframed it. And sometimes, that's all healing needs. Something changed the second I started showing up in my own life, without waiting for them to notice. People who had been quietly watching, coworkers, acquaintances, old college friends, started reaching out. Not with pity, but with admiration. "You're so brave," one wrote. "I wish I had the courage to walk away from a family that doesn't see me." I hadn't realized how many of us were invisible in our own stories. And maybe that was part of the healing too, knowing I wasn't alone. We're taught to keep it quiet, to preserve the family image, to smile in group photos and crop our pain out later. But here I was, no longer asking to be seen by people who refused to look. I had simply turned on the light and let whoever noticed walk in. One afternoon, I got a card in the mail. No return address. Inside was a note. "You reminded me I'm allowed to walk away, too." I stared at it for a long time, my hands shaking. That's when I knew this story wasn't just mine. It was a lifeline, one I almost didn't throw. Even Grandpa seemed different lately, more alive. He started planting herbs on the windowsill, humming songs from his youth. When I asked him why he seemed lighter, he smiled and said, "Company like yours tends to do that." He didn't need noise to feel full, just presence. That's the kind of love I'd been starved for without even knowing it. It was never about being loud, it was about being real. And being real, I realized, is loud enough in a world full of performance. One night, I wrote a letter to my mother. Not to send Hezid, just to say what had lived unspoken in me for too long. I told her how it felt to show up year after year, hoping for a different ending. How I kept shrinking, dressing differently, editing myself in conversations, hoping she'd approve. How the silence after Grandpa's house felt like a final verdict, that I was never enough. I cried writing it. Not out of bitterness, but release. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. But peace doesn't come from others changing it, comes from no longer needing them to. I folded the letter, placed it in a box under my bed, and left it there like a gravestone over the version of me that waited. Forgiveness, I discovered, doesn't always need permission. It doesn't need an apology or recognition. Sometimes it's just letting go of the story where you're waiting for someone to make it right. I could forgive her without pretending it didn't hurt. I could forgive her without inviting her back into the same space. It was the most grown-up thing I'd ever done, letting go without turning bitter. Grieving the mother I wished I had while accepting the one I got, I stopped needing her to be more and started giving myself what she couldn't. Love, belief, celebration. These things didn't have to be outsourced. Forgiveness wasn't letting her off the hook. It was taking myself off it. 2 weeks later, I hosted my own holiday dinner. Not fancy. Just 10 of us, friends, a couple of neighbors, Grandpa, and a woman I met at the bookstore who had no one to spend the season with. I cooked some of the dishes I remembered from childhood, only this time they tasted like choice, not performance. We laughed a lot. There were no dress codes, no politics, no tight smiles for photos, just connection. I looked around at the table and realized I wasn't missing anything. I had everything I thought I had to beg for. The difference was, now it came freely. I made a toast that night. 2 new traditions, I said, lifting my glass. To the people who see us when no one else does, and to choosing joy even if it's only us at the table. I caught Grandpa's eye across the table. He nodded, eyes glistening. He knew what I meant. He always had. That night, after everyone left and the dishes were stacked in the sink, I sat alone in the quiet and cried, not from sadness, but relief. I had stopped waiting at a locked door. I had built a new one, and it was wide open. Tradition isn't what you inherit, it's what you choose to carry forward. And I was finally choosing me. It didn't take long for the silence to break. A week after our small gathering, I noticed a flurry of family posts, online photos of their massive Christmas spread, posed and polished. But underneath one of Amanda's photos, a cousin I hadn't seen in years commented, "Where's Ellie? Wasn't she coming home?" I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Then came the texts. First Amanda, then Brian. Light-hearted, passive-aggressive questions that were actually small probes. Hope you're doing something fun for the holidays. Didn't see you in Tahoe this year, busy again. I could see it in the subtext. They noticed. Not just that I wasn't there, but that I didn't ask to be. That, more than anything, unsettled them. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying. And that made them wonder if maybe they weren't as central to my life as they thought. In families like mine, pulling away is rebellion, but healing quietly. That's revolution. Grandpa noticed too. One morning while we had coffee, he said, "They've started asking about you." I raised an eyebrow. "What did you say?" He smiled and sipped his tea, told them, "I've never seen you happier." That was enough for me. It felt like power, not in the loud, dramatic way, but in the way a sunrise doesn't ask permission to rise. It just does. 2 weeks after Christmas, Amanda showed up at my apartment. No warning, just a knock on the door and her perfectly styled self holding a tray of leftover peppermint bark. "Thought you might want this?" she said with a shrug. I let her in. Not because I owed her, but because I was curious. She looked around the apartment. Her eyes landed on a framed photo of me and Grandpa from our holiday dinner. "You look different," she said. I wasn't sure if it was a compliment. "You seem ... peaceful." I just nodded. She stood there awkwardly, her practiced confidence slipping. Then she said something that took me off guard. "It felt weird without you this year." Mom tried to make it seem normal, but it wasn't. There was no apology. Not exactly, but something in her tone cracked. "We missed you." A pause. "I missed you." I didn't rush to reassure her. I just listened. For once, I wasn't rushing to fix things. I let the silence stretch. Eventually, I offered her a seat. We drank tea, talked about childhood memories. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it was a beginning. And beginnings don't need fanfare, just honesty. I'd be lying if I said the grief didn't linger. Healing isn't a straight line, it's circular. Sometimes I'd be washing dishes and hear a holiday song that brought me back to those long drives to the family house, hoping this time would be different. And I'd feel that familiar ache in my chest. There's a cost to not belonging. You lose stories, memories, sometimes even people. But the higher cost: losing yourself to stay in places that erase you. That was the trade I'd been making for years. The unspoken belief that if I just performed better, I'd finally earn my seat, I'd finally be enough. Now, I had something better than belonging. I had alignment. I had peace. I had friendships that weren't built on shared blood, but on mutual love and presence. And Grandpa, his steady, grounding presence was proof that not all family needs correcting. Some simply needs noticing. The hardest part was realizing that I'd been the one holding the door open, hoping they'd walk through. But I was also the one who had the power to close it. Not in anger, but in protection. And sometimes, loving yourself means locking the door and building a new house entirely. About a month after Amanda's visit, I got a voicemail from my mother. Her tone was clipped, polite, and rehearsed. "Hope you're doing well, Eleanor. Your father and I were just talking about the next holiday plans. Let us know if you'll be joining." She never said we missed you. She never asked how I was. Just a distant invitation, as if I were a distant cousin. I didn't call back right away. I listened to it again the next day. Then again a week later. Not because I was considering it, but because I was trying to understand the motive. Was it guilt? Obligation? Damage control? The more I sat with it, the more I realized how little I actually needed from them now. Their house, once the center of everything, had become just another building. I didn't long for a seat at their table anymore. I had my own, and it was full of people who saw me, not just tolerated me. Still, something inside me stirred when I thought of Grandpa sitting alone again this year. He'd never say it, but I knew what it meant to him when I came home. Not for the family gathering, but for him. So I called him. "I'll be in town for New Year's," I said. "Just for you." He didn't say much, but I heard the smile in his voice. I wasn't prepared to hear from Brian. He'd been quiet through it always, the observer. Rarely the one to pick sides. But out of nowhere, I got a message. "Got time for coffee?" I agreed. Curious. We met at a bookstore cafe near my apartment, a spot I loved. He looked nervous, almost like a kid about to confess a secret. "I'd been thinking a lot," he started, staring into his cup. "About Tahoe, about ... you." That alone was a shock. Brian wasn't known for introspection. He told me he'd seen the posts, heard Amanda talk about my retreat, and realized how little he actually knew about my life. "Mom and Dad made it seem like you were just too busy or not interested. But I think that was just easier for everyone to believe." He looked at me then. Really looked. "I'm sorry, El." It was the first genuine apology I'd received from any of them. And it landed differently, because it wasn't defensive. It wasn't about justifying the past. It was about recognizing it. We talked for nearly 2 hours. About childhood, about how each of us had been shaped, about how expectations had boxed us all in. When he left, he hugged me tightly and whispered, "Don't disappear again." That moment reminded me that healing doesn't always come where we expect it. Sometimes it sneaks in through the quietest sibling, holding a cup of coffee and a handful of regret. Growth is easy to proclaim, but hard to sustain, especially when people try to pull you back into old versions of yourself. That's what I felt when Mom sent another message. This one, warmer. Almost too warm. "We're planning a smaller Easter lunch this year. Just the core family would love to have you back." It sounded sweet, but I knew what it was. A test, a hook, an attempt to reset the scriptware. I showed up grateful, eager, proving I was still the good daughter who just wanted to be included. But I wasn't her anymore. I crafted my response with care. "Thank you. I'm focusing on cultivating spaces that feel nourishing to me right now. I hope it's a lovely gathering." It wasn't cold, but it was clear. I wouldn't unlearn everything I'd fought to learn just to be back in the room. That night, Grandpa called. "Your mother told me what you said." He chuckled. "You're something. You know that." I smiled. "You taught me to be," and it's true he had, with his quiet support. With his questions instead of judgments. With his presence instead of performance. I stayed changed because I had finally seen what it felt like to belong to myself. And no family gathering could ever replace that. Spring arrived quietly, and with it, the anniversary of the retreat. I hadn't planned to mark it, but something inside me needed to. So I drove out to a quiet spot on the coast where I used to paint with Grandpa when I was a teen. I brought my sketch pad, some tea, and silence. No audience, no performance, just space. As I sat there sketching, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, peace that wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. It was just me and the breeze and the waves. My presence, my life, was no longer waiting to be validated by anyone. I thought about all the years I tried to shrink myself to fit into the family mold. All the times I questioned whether my sensitivity, my creativity, my choices were too much. But they weren't too much, they just didn't fit the wrong room. Now, I had my own room, my own table, my own rhythm, and I was building a life that no longer apologized for its brightness. Sometimes the loudest transformation is simply the one that doesn't need to explain itself anymore. A month later, I got a group message from Amanda, something she rarely sent. Just wanted to share some family news, it read. We've decided not to do the big Tahoe gathering this year. Everyone's been feeling stretched. Maybe we're due for a quieter season. It was worded gently, but I saw what was underneath. The extravagance had lost its glow. The network event energy wasn't nourishing anyone anymore. Something had shifted. And maybe, just maybe, my absence had been part of what triggered that shift. No one mentioned me directly. No one said, "Eleanor, you were right." But silence can speak volumes. Sometimes, the systems we refuse to feed begin to collapse on their own weight. I didn't gloat. I didn't send a clever reply. I just read the message, sipped my coffee, and smiled softly to myself. The truth doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs time and consistency. And I had finally learned to live in both. That summer, I hosted another creative retreat. Smaller this time, more intimate. And this time, I wasn't running it to prove anything, I was doing it because it brought me joy. Grace came again, of course. So did Troy and his partner. But we added new faces, people I'd met through clients. Mutual connections, even a local potter I'd admired for years. We spent the week unplugged, grounded, connected. It wasn't just about creativity. It was about honesty, laughter, space to grieve, to dream, to breathe. On the last night, we built a fire by the water. Someone brought a guitar. I watched the flicker of flames reflect in the faces around me, these beautiful, brave souls who had also chosen themselves in small and large ways. Heather showed up the next morning, not with an apology, but with muffins. "Didn't want to miss this year," she said, hugging me like a sister, not like someone making amends. And that meant more. Because this wasn't about healing the old story anymore. It was about living a new one, on our terms. A few weeks after the retreat, I received a handwritten envelope in the mail. It was from my cousin Lydia, someone I hadn't spoken to deeply in years. Inside was an invitation to a small backyard gathering she was hosting in Santa Barbara. "No expectations," she wrote. "Just wanted you to know I'd love to see you if you're free." It wasn't the kind of invitation sent out of obligation. It was thoughtful, warm, and personal. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a backup plan. I felt like someone who mattered. IRSVPD, yes, almost immediately, not because I needed to prove anything, but because I wanted to be around people who saw me clearly. When I arrived, I was met with hugs and open-hearted conversation. Lydia introduced me as one of the most inspiring creatives I know, and I felt my chest tightened, not with anxiety, but with a deep, quiet joy. I didn't have to edit myself. I didn't have to explain my path or hide my colors. I was simply received. Sometimes the softest invitations hold the most radical healing. That fall, I returned to the old cabin my grandparents had once called home. Heather had been helping organize some of their personal effects and invited me to come look through anything I might want to keep. I wasn't sure what I was searching for, maybe closure, maybe a thread. Among the dusty books and framed black and white photos, I found a weathered leather notebook, Grandpa's journal, pages filled with sketches, stories, and reflections from decades past. I sat down on the floor, tears silently tracing my cheeks as I read. There were entries about each grandchild, and the ones about me, they glowed. "Eleanor has a wild, sacred way of seeing." One read, "She notices things, others miss shadows, stillness, patterns in chaos. I hope one day she knows how rare that is." Another entry, "Years later, I fear Richard doesn't understand her. But she's not broken. She's just brilliant, in a way they haven't learned to name." The validation I had craved for so long, it had existed all along. I just hadn't known where to look. I used to think I needed a seat at their table, that if I just waited long enough, proved myself loud enough, they'd pull out a chair and let me belong. But that was a younger version of me, a version who still thought permission was the currency of acceptance. Now, I understand something else entirely. I don't need a chair at a table that wasn't built for me. I've become the place I am, the home, the space where real connection lives. And those who recognize that are always welcome. I no longer chase family ties that bind me in shame. I honor the ones that hold me in truth. And even when it's complicated, even when the old wounds whisper, I remind myself that I have the power to shape my own legacy. My grandparents planted the seed. I chose to water it in my own garden. What's grown is nothing short of sacred. Because healing isn't a finish line, it's a rhythm, a returning. Becoming. The drive back to the airport was quieter than I anticipated, even though I had music playing and the city lights twinkling outside. My heart was still anchored to that dimly lit living room, to the quiet presence of my grandfather and the weight of his silence. I kept replaying his voice in my head, the way it had cracked when he asked if I was hungry, like he wasn't sure what care even looked like anymore. There had been no anger in him, only an immense, unspoken grief. And that somehow made it worse, because it meant this had become his norm. I wanted to pretend I could move on, that I could just get on my flight, land back in Los Angeles, and pick up my carefully structured life. But even the thought of my downtown apartment, my perfect job, my color-coded calendar felt distant, like it belonged to a version of me that didn't yet know what I had just seen. Something inside me had shifted in that living room. Something I couldn't ignore. I had spent years blaming distance for the wedge in my family, telling myself holidays were just hectic. Now, I saw the wedge had been intentional. Someone had made sure to sever a branch of the tree. That someone, I feared, was my own mother. The idea haunted me during the flight. I scrolled through old photos on my phone, family barbecues, Christmases with everyone laughing, birthdays with homemade cakes and backyard decorations. My grandfather was in nearly every one, always smiling, always helping. My mom, too often orchestrating things. So how did we get from that to this? And more importantly, why was he left alone, eating a sandwich in silence, while the rest of us toasted at brunches and exchanged gifts like nothing had happened? I arrived back in LA, but didn't unpack my suitcase. I couldn't. My apartment felt too sterile, too empty of meaning after the emotional avalanche I had just endured. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the travel bag I hadn't even zipped shut properly. And I realized I couldn't pretend this holiday was just another awkward family event. No, this had been a breaking point. Or maybe the revealing point, the one that uncovered what had been broken for far longer than I had known. I needed answers, and more than that, I needed to know who else was aware of what had really happened. The next morning, I called Aunt Joanne, my mom's older sister, someone who had always been warm but mysteriously absent from recent gatherings. I told her I needed to talk, urgently, and surprisingly, she agreed. "Come over," she said. "I've been waiting for someone to ask." Aunt Joanne lived in a modest bungalow just outside of Pasadena, surrounded by rose bushes she kept meticulously trimmed, and wind chimes that tinkled even without wind. As I pulled into her driveway, I noticed her peeking through the front window before opening the door. She looked older than I remembered, her silver hair pulled into a low bun, her eyes kind but burdened. "Come in, baby," she said. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I stepped in and instantly felt something I hadn't in days. Welcome. We sat at her kitchen table with mugs of cinnamon tea between us. And for a while, she just watched me, giving me space, not rushing. Finally, I whispered, "Why was Grandpa alone?" Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture softened, like she'd been holding her breath for years. "Because he wasn't allowed," she said. "Your mother." She made sure of that. The words hit like a thunderclap. I blinked at her, waiting for her to elaborate. And slowly, she did. Joanne explained how, after my grandmother passed, Grandpa had started needing more assistance. Nothing serious at first, just help with appointments, groceries, and managing bills. He didn't want to burden anyone, especially not my mother, who had taken on the role of family authority after Nana died. Your mom said she'd handle it, Joanne said, but what she really did was isolate him. It started with small things: canceling visits, forgetting to invite him to events, claiming he didn't want to come. Until one day, no one checked anymore. According to Joanne, every time she tried to visit, my mom would intercept. "Dad's tired," she'd say, "it's not a good time." Eventually, Joanne stopped pushing. She lived far and figured maybe she was being dramatic. But now that I had seen Grandpa like that, left in the dark literally and emotionally, she realized just how wrong she had been. Your mom didn't want the responsibility, Joanne said. She wanted the narrative. And caring for him didn't fit in with the one she curated. My stomach churned. I thought about all the holidays where his absence had been explained away by simple phrases. "He's not feeling well," or "he's traveling." I had believed every one. Not once had I called him directly. Not once had I questioned it. And now I was wondering, what kind of daughter does that make me? Or worse, what kind of person? Joanne didn't sugarcoat it. "Your mother didn't start this way," she said, her voice more brittle now. "She was generous once. Protective, even. But something shifted after Nana passed. It's like she couldn't handle the vulnerability, the fear that we might actually need each other more. So she hardened." She paused, then looked at me with heavy eyes. "I think she believed she was doing what was best. But control, masquerading as care, is still control." I asked why no one else had stepped in. Why hadn't anyone else noticed? Joanne hesitated, then admitted the truth that sat like a rock in my chest: because she made it easy not to. She told everyone Grandpa was fine. She used your successor distance as evidence that everything was handled, and we wanted to believe her. We wanted to believe someone was taking care of things. My hands trembled around my tea mug. That someone was supposed to be me. As the conversation deepened, we talked not just about Grandpa, about our whole family. How things had been shifting for years, in subtle ways none of us questioned until it was too late. "Families don't fall apart all at once," Joanne said. "They quietly rearrange, and then one day you look around and realize the people who needed the most weren't just forgotten, they were dismissed." I had never felt so complicit in something I hadn't even realized I was part of. Before I left, Joanne handed me a small envelope. "He wanted you to have this," she said. "Your grandpa gave it to me a few weeks ago. Said if you ever asked the right questions, I'd know when it was time." My fingers hesitated over the seal. Inside was a letter, handwritten in his uneven script. Just seeing it made my throat close. "Read it when you're ready," Joanne said softly. I drove home with the envelope in my coat pocket. Like a fragile truth I wasn't quite ready to unpack. But I knew once I read it, there would be no unknowing. And part of me feared what my grandfather might finally reveal, with no one left to interrupt him. I didn't expect the ache to disappear overnight. Some mornings still begin with silence that feels like absence, not peace. But the more I sit with it, the more I realize it's not emptiness, it's spaciousness, room I never had before to grow into the woman I've become. That growth came with choices no one clapped for. Saying no to family invitations, leaving texts unread, choosing therapy over reunions. It felt like betrayal, at first. But over time, I saw the truth: it was loyalty to myself. And isn't that what love is supposed to be? Not just sacrifice, but protection. Not just tradition, but intention. I learned to mother myself the way my own mother never could. I fed my heart with gentleness instead of guilt. I became the family I needed. That's not to say I've given up on reconciliation, but I've released the fantasy of them changing. Now, any return must begin with repair, not just familiarity. If they come knocking again, they'll need to come as equals, not as entitled benefactors. That's the cost of re-entry. Until then, I build, I love, I nurture the circle I've created. People who see me, not just for what I give, but for who I am. I used to think healing looked like a perfect ending. Now I know it looks like this: living, choosing, becoming every single day. Some days I pass by families in parks, their laughter rising like music, and for a flicker, I envy them. But I don't stay there long, because I remember the price I paid for pretending my own family sounded like that, and I know peace is better than illusion. Other days, I receive messages from extended relatives, some vague, some sharp: "You should forgive. Life is short." As if my boundaries are bitterness. As if survival should be silent. But I've learned that love without respect is just manipulation dressed in tradition. So I answer only when my soul feels safe. And when I don't respond, that's a response to IML that says, I am not available for dynamics that drain me. I am not a resource to be mined. I am a person to be met. It's not easy. No one teaches you how to grieve a living family. To accept that they are alive, well, and not good for you. But there's a sacredness in that honesty, a holiness in that clarity. It's where my new life began. Because the truth is, I didn't lose my family that day. I uncovered the reality that had always been there. And once you see clearly, you can never unsee. You just choose, will I keep bleeding for belonging, or will I heal and build something new? I chose healing. I chose truth. And with it came a new kind of abundance. Not in stuff, but in spirit. A fullness that comes from living aligned with my values, not others' expectations. My home is now filled with laughter that doesn't cost me my peace. Friends who ask real questions, not just share gossip. A partner who holds space, not leverage. Even the quiet moments hum with safety. I've redefined family. Sometimes I write letters I'll never send. To the people I used to long for, I pour out the love I wish we'd shared. Not to get it back, but to release it. Because letting go with grace is also a gift to yourself. The girl who once begged for attention is now a woman who commands respect. And not because I'm louder, but because I'm clearer. My worth is no longer up for negotiation. I've learned that being chosen starts with choosing myself. That choice led me here. To joy I built, to peace I protected, to relationships I cultivated from truth. I used to dream of returning to the house I came from. Now, I'm too busy creating the home I've always needed with open arms. But strong walls. Healing taught me how to see clearly, not through bitterness, but through wisdom. I no longer romanticize people's potential. I accept who they've shown me they are. That acceptance doesn't make me cold, it makes me whole, and it protects the parts of me I fought too hard to reclaim. The silence from my family used to crush me. Now, it reminds me of the space I've opened for joy. Without their noise, I've heard my own voice for the first time. That voice told me, you are enough without them. You are sacred even when unseen. I stopped chasing invitations that came with conditions. I stopped trying to earn a seat at a table where I was always served shame. And when I did, something unexpected happened. I found other tables. With people who didn't ask me to shrink. Who handed me the salt and said, season this place with your soul. That's what family can be: people who see your fire and don't fear it. Who fan your flames, not smother your spark. I've met them in bookstores, in retreats, in whispered conversations over coffee. Some call them friends. I call them my chosen ones. We don't share blood, but we share something deeper: truth. A commitment to honesty, presence, and care. There is no guilt, no scorekeeping, just mutual regard. And in that space, I've experienced more love than I ever knew was possible. I still carry grief. It moves through me in waves. A song, a scent. A memory I didn't ask for. But I've learned not to fight it. Grief isn't the enemy, it's proof I once hoped, once tried, once loved fully. Now, I hold that grief gently. I sit with her like an old friend. I no longer try to fix her or shut her down. Instead, I ask, what do you need? And often, she answers, to be seen without being silenced. Some days, I still wish my parents would call with a real apology. Not a surface-level gesture, but a soul-deep recognition of what was broken. But even if that day never comes, I'll be okay. Because my healing no longer depends on their change. That's the power of becoming your own sanctuary. You stop waiting for rescue. You stop outsourcing your peace. You stop giving your joy away to people who can't hold it with care. You learn to be your own safe place. And that's the greatest freedom of all. So no, I'm not angry anymore. I'm not resentful. I'm rooted in my worth, in my boundaries, in my voice. And in the quiet strength that says, I don't need to be invited back. I built something better. Sometimes people ask, don't you miss them? And the answer is complicated. I miss the version of them I needed. I miss what could have been, if only, but I don't miss the pain. I don't miss the pretending. I don't miss the ache of never being enough. I've made peace with the gap, the space between what I hoped for and what actually is. That space used to feel like failure. Now, it feels like freedom. I don't have to force anything to fit anymore. The retreat I hosted wasn't just an event, it was a declaration, a living altar to my own becoming. And every moment of that week whispered, you are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are not a mistake. You are the moment. Even now, months later, I feel its echo in the way I speak to myself, in the way I make decisions, in the way I refuse to abandon myself for the comfort of others. That's the legacy I'm building, one where my wholeness is non-negotiable. The girl who once waited by the window is gone. In her place stands a woman who opens the door for herself every single day, not because someone finally gave her permission, but because she finally realized she was the key all along. The first time I looked at myself and didn't see someone lacking, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I finally recognized me. Not the version shaped by others' expectations, but the quiet, steady soul who survived it all and turned the ache into art. There's something holy about claiming your voice, especially when it was taught to whisper when every instinct was second-guessed or silenced. Now, when I speak for the version of me who couldn't. And every word feels like freedom. I don't seek revenge. I don't need them to hurt the way I did. That's the beauty of growth. It doesn't require destruction, just distance, just discernment, just the courage to walk away without dragging the wreckage behind you. They still live in the same patterns. I've seen it, the same performances, the same roles, but I've stepped off that stage. I'm not interested in pretending anymore. My peace is not a prop. It's the foundation now. I've become the version of me I used to pray for. One who doesn't flinch when abandoned. One who doesn't shrink to be loved. One who knows love isn't proven through pain. That version was born the moment I stopped trying to earn a place and chose to belong to myself. I think of my grandfather sometimes, of the way his eyes softened when he looked at me, the way he never asked me to be anything but myself. He saw me before I saw me, and in many ways I've been trying to live up to that gaze ever since. He would have loved the retreat, the laughter, the ease, the way people showed up for each other without expectations or judgment. It felt like what he used to create, just with a different name, a different era, a different kind of family. Some wounds stay with you, but not all scars are shameful. Some are reminders that you endured, that you didn't give up when you had every reason to, and that, in itself, is sacred. I wear mine like medals, not marks of failure. There's a softness in me now that used to feel dangerous. I used to think it made me weak, vulnerable. But now I understand it's my strength. My softness isn't naivety. It's knowing the pain and still choosing to love anyway. That's what this journey gave me. Not perfection, not a clean ending, but softness, power, boundaries that don't scream but stand, and the quiet certainty that I never needed them to see me clearly, only ever needed to see myself. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't ask, will they ever love me right? I ask, am I loving myself enough today? Because that's where the healing lives. In the daily return to self-trust, self-respect, self-belief. The old narrative said I was too much, too sensitive, too wild, too soft. But all that too much turned out to be just enough for the right people. The ones who don't flinch when I cry, who celebrate when I shine, who stay, not out of obligation, but choice. I built a home within myself, not a mansion, not perfect, but honest. With room for all my parts, the messy, the magic, the mourning. And in that home, I'm never alone. I'm always welcome, always whole. I no longer confuse silence for peace, or performance for love. I don't dim to keep the room comfortable. I don't apologize for my joy. I let it spill, even when it makes others uneasy, because it's mine, and I've earned every flicker of it. So here I am, not waiting by the door, not asking to be let in. I'm building my own doors, my own tables, my own sanctuary. And those who come with love in their hands and truth in their hearts, those people, they're already home. I don't know who needed to hear this story today, but if you've ever felt like the forgotten one, the overlooked one, the invisible one, I see you, not just with sympathy, but with solidarity. You're not alone in your ache. You're not broken for wanting to be seen. You are worthy right now, as you are. This wasn't just about a family gathering. It never is. These things run deeper than calendars and invitations. They go back to identity, belonging, and the stories we're told about our place in the world. But what I've learned is this: when they don't offer you a seat, you don't wait. You rise and build your own circle, because healing isn't about getting back what you lost. It's about realizing what you never needed. The approval, the performance, the permission. You already have everything required to begin again, to build again, to become again. So I hope my story gave you more than entertainment. I hope it gave you courage to set the boundary, to walk away if needed, to believe that the version of you you're becoming is already worthy of love, peace, and community. Drop a comment below if this story stirred something in you. Share what part hit home. Or just say, I'm here, so others know they're not alone. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because stories like this aren't just content, they're lifelines. And we're building something honest here. Thank you for staying with me, for honoring this story, for listening not just with ears, but with your whole heart. Remember, your voice matters. Your presence matters. And when they try to dim your light, become the fire. You don't need their space. You are the space.